Beijing has ceased military exercises around the island of Taiwan, but says preparation for war continues. Closer to home, the Australian government is wary of Chinese influence in the Pacific, but believes Pacific Island nations want a democratic and independent future. Joining me live now is lawyer and pro-democracy activist Kevin Lam. Kevin, good to see you. Thanks for your time this morning. Let's start off with the Ambassador's comments at the National Press Club a couple of days ago now. It was pretty chilling stuff. What did you make of it?
Well, it's very mafia-like, wasn't it? I mean, it's all delivering a chilling message with a smile on his face. I mean, the whole thing about we'll use all necessary means to take back Taiwan, and you can use your imagination to think what all necessary means might mean, and then with a little smirk on his face. I think all of that is classic thug tactics.
To try and scare people off, which, I don't know, maybe would have worked in a time gone by, but will that happen now?
Well, I think it's fair to say that in a free society, citizens do not respond well to threats. Those sorts of threats might work well in an authoritarian setting where you know that you can back up your threats with arrests and torture and what have you. But in a place like Australia, that's not going to work. So
there was a fair bit of passive-aggressive motions going on too. I mean, he talked about the fact that China and Australia can be friends, but Australia has to do what China says, basically, and then goes on to say, you know, we're going to be taking Taiwan, use your imagination. Is that kind of classic verbiage?
It's not just classic verbiage, it's also classic Chinese foreign policy and even domestic policy thinking, and that is, we will find ways to make you rich, we will find ways to give you economic opportunities, but in return, there's got to be total submission. In a way, by analogy, you can say that it's a bit like a slightly difficult or very difficult restaurant customer who think that just because they're paying your bill, they can treat your chef or your waiter or what have you like rubbish.
We saw yesterday that China announced that it is going to pull back its military forces from Taiwan or surrounding Taiwan. Do you believe that that is just a temporary measure, that it is an inevitability that China will take Taiwan at some point in the not too distant future?
I think much will depend on what happens in Chinese domestic politics. There are now mounting economic problems in China when it comes to debts, when it comes to recession, when it comes to the never-ending zero-COVID strategy that they're pursuing, leading to lockdowns and reduced economic activity. If all of that really goes pear-shaped for China, then they might feel that there is more of a need to beat the nationalistic drum even further. And at that point, the risk of an invasion of Taiwan rises.
And if that happens, then it would go the way of Hong Kong, which you have a lot of experience around.
Well, whether Taiwan goes the way of Hong Kong depends on what the free world does. The free world has an option and has a choice. They can either sit back and let what happens to Hong Kong happen to Taiwan too, and probably worse, because if China conquers Taiwan militarily, they will probably feel emboldened to do even worse than what they did and are doing in Hong Kong. But if the free world doesn't stand by and realize that democracy is not costless and that not defending democracy is probably going to cost you more in the long term, then Taiwan might not suffer the fate of Hong Kong.
Were you encouraged, or are you now more fearful of Cheng Lei, who is in detention or in custody in China, following those comments from the ambassador? I
don't feel more or less confidence for Cheng Lei after those comments. I think the Chinese authorities are very good at hostage diplomacy, and that for so long as Australia doesn't, in their eyes, buckle, then unfortunately Ms. Cheng is in quite a lot of trouble.
She is a political pawn, and as long as Australia doesn't obey China's demands, she will stay where she is, won't she?
She won't stay where she is forever, but she risks getting a much longer prison sentence than she otherwise might have. I mean, we've seen that in the last year with 2 Canadians who have been held hostage in the Chinese justice system. And it took a lot of bartering and it took a lot of exchanges and wheeling and dealing before those 2 Canadians were released back to Canada. And I guess the same may well happen here.
All right, Kevin Lam, thanks for coming on the program this morning. I look forward to talking to you again as we follow developments out of China and Taiwan. Thanks, Kevin. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.